Hello and welcome to Season 4 of Frame and Reference. I'm your host, Kenny McMillan, and we have got just the craziest year ahead of us. This is such a good season. We've already got, I think, 8 interviews in the can, and they're all just bangers. You're really gonna love this. If this is your first time listening to Frame and Reference, you've got 3 years of just as good backlog to catch up on. We have had some insane guests on the show already, but you know, the longer you go, the better it gets. So this is the season premiere, and we've got Hoyte van Hoytema on the program, who shot Oppenheimer, as well as a plethora of other amazing films, many of them with Chris Nolan. You know, you got The Fighter in there, you got Ad Astra, all kinds of good stuff. Don't normally go on a lot of intro rants anymore. That was season 1 and 2. But you know, it's the first episode of the season, so I figured I'd check in, say hello, Happy New Year, and let you know that you are gonna absolutely love this episode and the rest of the season. So great salesmanship, Ken. Anyway, I'll let you get to it. This is my interview with Hoyte van Hoytema. You know what's funny is normally I'd start by asking like, oh, what have you been watching? But the past 15, 20 interviews have all been, oh, we all went and saw Oppenheimer. So what have you been watching?
Well, I've been kind of watching as much as I could. Everything kind of, you know, there's a couple of things I have not yet had the chance to watch, but you know, I try to kind of watch everything by the end of the year.
Really? Mm-hmm. I get all those, like, I picked up a subscription to Variety for no reason. Like, I read all the ASC magazines, but I don't know why I fucking bothered with Variety, because it's just all ads. And then that's when I go, oh, I missed a movie, you know, because it's like the for your consideration ones. You know, it's funny. Last night I was watching all the special features for the movies that you and Chris did, and then also Ad Astra. And it's funny, I like turned on, I think it was Ad Astra, and in the special features, like the first one I clicked, the dude mentioned Oppenheimer. He mentioned the Trinity test, because he was like, oh yeah, we I think it was the writer, the director was like, oh, you know, the idea that you could like nuke the atmosphere and kill everyone.
Oh yeah,
fascinating to me. So we put that into Ad Astra, and I was like, wow, this really has come full circle, hasn't it?
Yeah. Well, you know, Tenet, there's mention of Oppenheimer as well.
Yeah.
Frisia, you know, Dimple Kapadia, she's mentioned it to John David Washington at some point. You know. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. It keeps coming back. I mean, it kind of is a signifier of moments in history where important inventions are being made, and that, you know, potentially have some big implications on, you know, the generations after.
Yeah. The other thing I noticed watching all these first of all, I very much appreciate that you guys allow someone to make these like 1.5, 2 hour long special features things, because I'm a, you know, big physical media guy. Mm-hmm. And it's always a bummer when you get a DVD and it's just like an ad or like just the trailer in there, and you're like, what? I was hoping to learn something. You know, I spent my entire film career or like film education career, you know, watching special features.
It's interesting. I mean, sometimes you want to allow people a little bit into the kitchen, you know, of how things are made. But it's also, you know, just the idea or the concept that a film, it's more of an event. You know, you know, you can think of a film as, you know, film speaks for itself, and it sort of, you know, it's the 2 hours or 3 hours that you're in the theater. That's what counts, and to a certain extent, that's of course also true. But there's something nice about creating a little bit more, you know, sort of an event-like thing around the film, right?
Right.
It goes together with anticipation and sort of the marketing beforehand, you know, where, you know, you're trying to sort of prime the film or prime the audience in order to, receive the film in a certain way. And then after you watch it, there's so many, residual side paths that you can go into. So in that way, I mean, I think making offs are always very nice. They can get very self-indulgent, of course,
Yeah, sure.
And people talking about how great they are themselves and how incredible heavy the work was, et cetera, et cetera. But just purely as the filmmaking is a very limited medium, as all mediums are. Especially if you're kind of trying to talk about real life, there's so much more information that people had to let out of the film or couldn't touch on just because, it's so rich. And especially Oppenheimer, it's so rich in history, and there's so much known about him, because of all this FBI transcripts and where it was shadowed and where it was recorded and all these hearings. So there's like endless transcript about the life of that man. And of course, Chris had to make a very, very difficult, difficult choices and difficult decisions about what would make it in a movie and what wouldn't make it in a movie. But it's a living subject. So things live beyond the movie, and in that way, it's always nice to get some stuff.
Yeah.
Some extra material afterwards, I would say.
Yeah. Well, the thing I noticed is like it's, from whatever the first, I watched them way out of order, but like whatever, Dunkirk all the way to Oppenheimer, I think is including Ad Astra. It's the same crew every time. Like it's the same interview every time. And I don't know, I've interviewed 120 people, and I don't think I've ever necessarily, I mean, Bob Richardson, Bob Yeoman come to mind, mostly because they were the last two. But, it's kind of rare to constantly work with the same people. And I was wondering, I wanted to say it right up front. Shout out to Keith Davis. Shout out to fucking Keith Davis.
Yeah. Listen, Keith and I, we have worked together since Her, that I did with Spike Jonze. And I mean, he is downright the best focus puller in the world, but he's not only a focus puller, he's also, somebody that has to wrangle and manage a huge amount of complicated equipment, as well as a crew, and as well as that he is at the epicenter of whatever happens close to the camera. So, you have to have a gentle soul and a kind soul, and you have to be very, susceptible to the chemistry around the camera, and the actors have to feel good with you, so in that way, he's kind of an indispensable sort of, right arm extension for me. He's incredible, and any chance I get to shout him out, I will do it. He's extremely valuable and extremely precious and a wonderful human being. And I love, and I love, going all these adventures with him, and it doesn't limit for me. It's not limited to Keith. My keys like Adam Chambers and Kyle Carden. They're all wonderful, soulful people that have found their way and has fitted somehow their way into that weird little clan of people that we have. And, I don't want to sound too much like a hippie, but there's a lot of love, and there's a lot of, a lot of good chemistry in that group. And I think also, when people talk about, my cinematography or, oh, he's a nice guy to work with, very often, they're also talking about not me as a cinematographer, but me as a group and the way that we sort of enter the scene,
Right.
And these guys, they are helpful and, total co-creators of that entity. So,
yeah. Well, and also like the thing that always makes me laugh is, people, when the 5D came out or when the LF really got, everyone's talking about, oh, depth of field is becoming fetishistically shallow. And then you got Keith pulling T2 on IMAX,
Yeah, and we are sometimes expecting supernatural natural things from him. Now, what helps a lot, of course, also is to work with a director that really has a very big understanding of sort of the specific difficulty that all these kind of things bring along, right? Sometimes you need another take just because you're doing things that are very difficult, and if you work with a director that is clever enough to sort of understand the technology around the camera, you can become very productive, and in a way nobody on a film set is ashamed to fuck up when it's a fuck up that is sort of
human nature,
that is difficult. So there's this very open atmosphere where Keith can easily say to Chris or to me, listen, I don't feel good about this one, and Chris will say, yeah, okay, let's do another one, and we're watching rushes every day,
right?
Every day we're in the trailer, and that's like for a focus puller, that's kind of the most scary situation you can imagine. It's like, he gets the day after, he gets very harsh representation of his specific technical work, but to have to check yourself every day, to get the check, apart from that, you get very much acquainted also almost on an intuitive level with the equipment. There's a certain amount of pressure on you and everybody, but there's also this possibility in which you can always, there's always time to fix stuff, and it's it feels like a very sort of fluid and hands-on process.
Yeah.
You up, you can redo it, and you can fix it, and there's these chances to fix stuff, and it's nice.
Yeah, I mean, you guys have been working, not just you and Keith, but your whole crew apparently been working together for at least 8-10 years, whatever it is. So it must be a nice kind of shorthand. I did want to ask about dailies actually, but we'll stick with the crew thing, which is when you're prepping these films, is there, because you guys have worked together for so long, is there kind of a routine that you go through? Like, does it start with references and then look development and tests and then something, or is every film kind of different, or is it somewhere in between?
Yeah, I mean, you could say that there's some sort of routine. It's not a written routine that we walk by, but say we have like 12 weeks prep, we don't start with putting up photos and having long discussions about looks, etc., etc. We each one of us, we slowly sort of step into that monster of the film itself, and we do that slowly also because the material itself has to sort of tell you what you're going to do and how you're going to do it.
Right.
So you start prep, you start testing, and whenever you discover something that you want to investigate a little bit deeper, you start testing that a little bit more excessively. And of course, every film has this, this numerous amount of puzzles, or this assignments that, when you start a film like that, you don't know what you're going to do, and you don't know how you're going to do them, and you kind of know that you have to figure out, or that you have to start building things in order to be able to do them. I always start a dialogue with Dan Sasaki at Panavision, who's
also wanted to talk about him.
Yeah, who's one of those lens gurus that can, build specific options or optics or adapt optics that really, can do things that normal off-the-shelf lenses can't do. We talk a lot with Andrew Jackson or Scott Fisher. Scott Fisher is a special effects supervisor that has always access to a gigantic workshop where he can build things or contraptions, or, Andrew Jackson, our visual effects supervisor, that has always this, strong intent to do as much as possible in camera, So I don't know if I always compare him a little bit to, he's like to me is like the today living Douglas Trumbull.
Oh, sure.
He he is before he gets into sort of working with computers and sort of CGI options in order to do visual effects, he will resort and see if we can get things in camera, which then means, he and Scott, they're building like the weirdest machines in order to obtain certain visual effects elements, etc., etc.
Right.
Yeah, I love talking to that department a lot, and I always love to be in the middle of like the mechanics of it, And it's something I love in making the photography for this film. So when you start prepping, I mean, there's a lot of details that you get into, that and without necessarily knowing the look of a film, you kind of know the feel, and you kind of know the approach of how you want to do things, and then you let those things kind of instruct you on how to take your next steps.
Yeah. Do you guys? So you don't have photos, but do you guys kind of talk about? I guess a better question would be, what don't you have to talk about anymore? Like, what are the things that come very easily when you do each of these films?
I mean, we do have photos and we do watch films. We do watch films, but it's not like where we get into a production, we don't have like a lookbook, like this is the way the film is going to be, and this is going to be blue and this is going to be green, or et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we still have some sort of a relatively open relation to whatever comes into our direction at that time. But I guess I always like to say that the best prep for these films that we're doing is very much the previous films that we've been doing together. Chris and I worked four films together, and the first film that we did together, I had a lot of references and I had a lot of photos, and those photos the main function of those materials is not necessarily this is the way I want it to look, or
right.
But it's also very much is like I thought about the scene, it could have been something like this, and then Chris can look at it and he can respond to it, and I can see his response, and I can sort of adapt my mind a little bit to that. So those images and those films, they're very much a way for people to get to know each other, to get to sort of gauge each other's taste and philosophy and mentality towards certain things.
Yeah.
So I guess when you have done 4 films together, you kind of like times you're like husband and wife. You
right.
You understand what the other party likes and not likes, and you understand how you can surprise the other party or not, and you have to rely a little bit more on your intuition and on the fact that there's a lot of things that of each other that you don't have to speak of. So
yeah, I noticed obviously in all this behind the scenes stuff, you've always got that Leica, and this is kind of a 2-pronged thought, which one, I've mentioned this a bunch of times on this podcast, but Tim Ives really got me into photo books. One, like I asked him if he had any references for, I think it was Halston, and he walked over and pulled a stack like this and just started doing Reading Rainbow on me. And just, but I was wondering, A, what are you photographing? Is that just for you, or is that for like a different reference? And then also, are you a photo book person?
I'm a photo book person. I like looking at photo books, for a variety of reasons. I love using that Leica very much. I very often use it as a as a viewfinder or as a a contrast viewing glass, if you will,
Sure.
as well as a notepad. It's like you're seeing things and you just want to quickly hold it up and show Chris or show your act.
Oh, so it's a digital Leica.
It's a digital Leica.
Oh.
Yeah.
I guess I naturally thought it was film.
Yeah, Leica had built these cameras that look like analog Leicas, but
Yeah.
but what I like with that Leica very much is that you can set this camera up and approximate to a certain extent how the sensitivity of your film and to a certain extent a little bit an indication of how things are looking in terms of contrast and so on.
Right.
So it's a little bit of a sketchbook for me, and it's also
Fun to document.
yeah, but if you look for is that my images, I very often I just erase my memory cards, after they're full and don't load them up. They're literally like a sketchbook, and I'm
Sure.
I'm using it in a very not precious way, and also for me it's also very often when I use it as a sketchbook, I don't really use it as a precise framing device, for instance.
Right.
It's a lot of out of focus pictures and a lot of it's more sort of a my small sort of guilty OCD pleasure just to sort of it's almost as good as what I love doing is like squinting as a
Right.
cinematographer. I on the set I very often sort of squint and you're trying to sort of make charcoal drawings in your head, bright light, you try to work a little holistic and you try to just sort of judge your set in terms of lights and darkness by just squinting your eyes. And that's a little bit how that Leica works for me. It allows me to, it allows me just to make very quick and rough and sort of overall judgments about,
Yeah. Well, and you just mentioned like not being too precious about stuff. I did see in one of these behind the scenes features that you were I think it might have been for Oppenheimer, where you were talking about not being too not making it too pretty, not making it too, what was it? I wrote it down. Who cares? Doesn't matter.
But I recognize very
Peaceful.
much what you're aiming at, and that is that when I watch a film, there's nothing more disturbing for me than to really become aware of the director photographer's OCD. It's like you have to create images and you have to sort of put them up on the screen and I just like where you can do that with a certain flair and a sort of ease without losing, sort of the holistic view about what the film has to mean and what it has to do and how it has to come across emotionally. But so often I see images that are almost feel like they're done by the cleaning lady,
Right.
They framing is all about, cleaning everything up, putting everything neatly in the right place, getting your light levels exactly right, and by doing that, you create some sort of an order, and you make things more neat, and to a certain extent, you make things more palatable. But as you do that, you also sort of, you start to suck life out of it, and one thing and one definition of a film is that of a good film or good photography is that it has to have life in it. It has to have a soul in it, and I think so about cinematography. But you could say the same for instance about music.
Yeah.
The way that you have perfect synthesized music. You can fusion jazz that is made by extremely capable musicians, and the technique has become so important, and you listen to it in a certain way. You have to listen to those pieces in a very intellectual way, and you have to know music, and you know exactly what people are doing. Whereas, I'm much more sort of a punk band person.
Yeah. Well, it brings up, I don't want to draw too much attention to it because I think you and the creator had the same problem where everyone really focused on the gear a lot. But a lot of attention was drawn to, shooting IMAX, shooting 70 and all this. And I was wondering kind of how IMAX is inherently a very beautiful, instrument. Was kind of the punk rock idea there that you're going to use the prettiest thing in kind of a non-precious way? Or like, how do you kind of square the that pretty tasteful medium with a more not basic in a derogatory way, but just, it's a very simple film like Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
Versus like Interstellar, which is fantastical,
Yeah, I mean, for starters, I think the most basic sort of musical instrument you can find is kind of the IMAX camera, right? Because effectively, it's a blank canvas kind of machine. It's a box with a motor and a hole and a piece of glass, and then there's this film strip that runs through the gate that is emulsion. So the way that you generate an image is extremely simple in comparison to, for instance, a digital signal.
Right.
A digital signal is the technology behind it becomes very complex, but also it means that there are a lot of steps in between, light, the wave of light, and when we see it afterwards after a digital projection, there's a lot of stuff that happens to it. Whereas, a film camera, you project on that emulsion, you develop that emulsion, and then you shoot light through it, and you kind of get a very direct, pure, or the most direct, purest way of, the most straightest path from object to seeing it later on the screen. And that way, it is a very beautiful format, and it's a very sort of precious format. But it's by all means, it is by no means is it a very sort of complex format. You know what I mean?
So would that mean that like in your guys' head, something like 16, which is much more has a very distinct aesthetic.
Mm-hmm.
Does that artifice, it's kind of the same mechanism, but does the artifice of let's say 16 take away from that simplicity in your guys' mind? Because since IMAX is so clean,
I mean, because of 16, because of the sheer size of the negative, you start to become very aware of the emulsion itself.
Okay,
the grain is much bigger, so there's a much bigger sort of visual obstacle to go through. You get very aware of what you're shooting on because it's 16 millimeter. But already when you jump to 35 millimeter, but then if you jump to IMAX 65 millimeter, that instantaneously sort of disappears, right? You stay with a relatively grainless image. I mean, it still has a lot of texture, and every frame you see, has of course grain in it, and what we then perceive as a human being or a human eye, it's very hard to define, or we don't really know yet. But there's definitely still a lot of texture to it. But I think very much about, the lower your resolution gets in a way, the more it creates a sort of a definition of your look, your look becomes very much subjective to the limitations of that specific stock or a specific resolution amount. And I think that with IMAX, that cap is just, that bar is just so high,
Right. Would you, if given the option, would you shoot like an Alexa 2000, just a sensor that's an 8x10 digital sensor? Would that solve the same problem, or is that emulsion simplicity really the goal there?
Well, it's not the emulsion simplicity alone. I mean, one thing that I love shooting on film is that idea,
Sure.
that in a way your resolution is endless.
Yeah.
And it's endless in a way that, the way that digital cameras generate an image and film cameras generate an image is very different. A digital image, you're exposing on a grid, and that grid is unchanged every single frame in 24 frames per second exposure. That grid will remain exactly that. Whereas when you expose on film, the grid that you expose on will reposition or will be different, will be totally different in shape or geometry than the previous frame. So you're effectively exposing every single frame on a total new grid, and so you create something that, I call it, and it's probably the wrong word, but I always call it temporal resolution. So
no, that's the right word.
You have resolution that is that grid, and you can say this is 2K, this is 4K, this is 6K, and that defines very much about how much pixels you have, and those pixels are every single frame in the same place. Whereas with film, you can say, okay, we have this amount of silver halides, and they're all in that position. So per frame, you can define a little bit your resolution. But if you create a moving image and you project that image on the consecutive frame on a grid that is very different with those silver halides slightly in different positions, even though you might have a slightly bigger cap on your, or you might have a slightly rougher grid pattern, you still have a medium that has the ability to draw or to show details that are not able in digital technology.
Sure.
And I think that kind of depth perception and that kind of rendition, that's something that it's very hard to sort of put your finger on. But I think, people respond very much in an emotional way to that, because it's so similar in a way to, our eyes work and our mind works,
Yeah.
Yeah. So in that way, for me, it's not always about just sort of making bigger sensors, bigger frames, and getting more and more and more information. It's also how you draw that information.
Well, and something that I saw you guys mention a lot in these special features things, and something that I've said a million times on this podcast, is emotionally correct oftentimes trumps technically correct. Having the perfect something is not always better than having the thing that makes you feel the way that you want, for instance, the audience to feel, or the way that you want.
Absolutely. And I think good things that connect emotionally, they have to somehow feel effortless as well.
Mm.
And again, I come back to music, right? You can be a great bass player or drummer or anything like that, and you can have the biggest ability of doing the most complex pieces of music and so on. But you really surpass the good musician when you actually can play the simplest things in the simplest way, and really connect with your audience. But very often it does mean that you need to be good in a way technically. You need to know a thing or two in order to sort of dare to go simpler. But for me, I mean, in my own career, I think every film I allow myself to be a little simpler, or sort of just to let go of old hang-ups and dare to, dare to be a little less obtrusive with the language, every time.
Yeah. I mean, that was something that I noticed in, again, I'm just referencing behind the scenes shit I watched a bunch, but even just watching Oppenheimer, it feels very simple. It's like the whole chef thing of like, you get good ingredients and season them simply and you just step away.
Yeah.
Was your guys' like lighting package and everything very complicated? Because I feel like everything was just, we'll put an 18K out the window, call it a day. And it still looks incredibly natural.
Well, sometimes, it depends very much on the assignment. I mean, I have no problems lighting with a light bulb. If it calls for it, and some locations you come and you want a lot of soft light coming from the window. An 18 or 218Ks bounced in a frame. I mean, we have a truck with us, and we always have possibilities to do that if needed. But I do think that you never enter a location with a precise image in your head. You always want to sort of understand and feel the place you're shooting. You very rarely want to work against what that place is giving you that you have then chosen before. You want to go with it. You want to sort of be in tune with it. Now, of course, you have these situations where either you screwed a shot up a shot the day before, and you have to now redo that shot, and now it's raining, but it's a close-up, so maybe you can create a little bit of sunshine and so on. So you always end up maneuvering or cheating yourself through those kind of situations. You always have to be ready for it. But I'm not the kind of cinematographer that comes to a place and says it has been like this in my head, and now we bring in all the equipment and it's going to be exactly like it has been in my head. Not at all. I'm much more like, this is kind of how it was in my head, but this is kind of nice too. So maybe we can use a little bit of that, and maybe we can incorporate a little bit of that. I'm much more sort of mellow and yeah, I hope reactive or perceptive a little bit towards what is around, and all that sort of in service of the
story.
The story, but also that belief that you kind of your artistic viewpoint is very important, but it cannot become something that's self-indulgent, or that is sort of the main
masturbatory.
Yeah.
It's funny because you see so many films that get all these like amazing cinematography awards. My argument is it's always the production designer that actually floated the DV, but it's usually the ones that, again, are just like kind of presented simply that people seem to really gravitate towards. And then you get these super polished ones that look like they're Super Bowl commercials that are still really cool, but people don't seem to connect with as much.
Mm-hmm.
Not always, obviously. This is a hyper generalization, but
I mean, listen, I think that when you give somebody an award, I think mostly you give somebody an award emotionally, right? You just decide, I like this better than that. And a lot of people that vote for these awards, they haven't gone to film school, or they don't really know what cinematography entails, or what visual effects entails, in a very technical way. That's a kind of our job.
Right.
But that's the way it is. I mean, and I think that people make those judgments emotionally, and that's kind of right in many ways as well. That's kind of also how you want your cinematography to be read. The last thing you want is like somebody's going to give you big prize because they know how difficult it was, yet the film you shot is kind of sucks. Of course, there's different awards. There's like,
ASC award.
ASC award.
That means a little
or well, it means more because you get, I think, or more. I think your colleagues, they're very aware of what you have been doing, and I think you very much get judged on the technicality and etc. But for instance, then the Academy Awards is a different thing again, and then a lot of different kind of audiences watch it. So
yeah.
So I think the biggest problem is not necessarily that you, the biggest issue is the awards are always called for cinematography, but you effectively you get awarded or not awarded for very specific aspects of cinematography.
Right. I when I was talking to Bob Richardson, he mentioned that Tarantino doesn't let him use the DI at all. Like where a lot of us would just be like, oh, I'll put a window there. I don't gotta flag that off. The wall can be hot, and I'll just bring it down. He's like, no. Is that the kind of the same thing with you guys? Because similar kind of film only approach. Are you guys purely photochemical, or are you allowed to use the DI?
Yeah, I mean we are. No, we are purely photochemical. For not just self-indulgent reasons, but we are also purely photochemical. That when you expose an IMAX frame, and which captures the world in front of the camera and with a certain resolution and a certain depth, the moment you go digital, the moment that you go into a DI, you have to scan it, and when you scan it, you lose a huge amount of your original resolution. An IMAX frame, arguably, can carry 12K to 18K resolution. So imagine scanning a film, how much of that resolution you just have to throw away. Or else if you photochemical and you make a contact print of it, you capture most of that quality. And that is one of the reasons that we choose to go the analog way, because it's the shortest and the purest way of the travel from your subject and from your shooting to the screen.
Yeah,
and that's kind of the reason that we're always so fanatic and about doing things in camera. And for a lot of people that sounds very self-indulgent and sort of like, they're film snobs or purists, but it's for us. It has a lot to do with quality and preserving quality and seeing through that. The details you capture on one end that you as a viewer will never be able to know how important or how not important they are, but to nurture them and to bring them all the way to the back end, to the screen.
Yeah. So how are you guys without the assistance of like the DI essentially? In what ways are you able to stay nimble on set? Like, are you simplifying anything? Are you? Is it just the fact that you guys work together for so long that everyone knows what you need to do, or what are some of those techniques that you're using to get such a high quality result? Not necessarily just with the film, but in the movie at a fast enough clip to keep with the schedule.
Well, coming back to what we earlier talked about, it's like how much do you allow your own OCD to take over? If you're in a room and a sun comes in, you can of course to a certain extent filter the sun out. But if you're in an exterior and your backlight really starts burning out, is it something you can accept? Is it can you shoot it, and can you accept the way that your dynamic contrast is a little more than you maybe would envision, or are you now going to wrangle everything in place in order to get it exactly where you need it to be? So I think while working, working for me it feels very often much more like setting up a charcoal sketch of a painting, rather than filling out all the blanks and shadings and so on. You work very holistically, but then suddenly you also understand, the advantages of analog technology, which is it's a medium that is so much it's so generous towards bigger lighting dynamics, for instance, or darkness, brightness. It's very truthful and loyal to the way your eyes perceive things. And because we know it so well now, and because we have worked about it, it almost becomes like a second nature.
Right.
You can look at it, you can look at something, you can squint, you can understand how this turns out, and you start to master a little bit of trickery, how to squeeze it back into a place where it's slightly acceptable and not. But if you become a total sort of detail fucker, kind of control, micromanaging control freak, DI is of course great.
Right.
Well, and whatever you didn't get, you put a power window on it and you get it back into your. But then there's this risk, of course. In the end, you'll get your film exactly the way you envisioned it, and my God, maybe it's lifeless,
Yeah.
So it's an interesting path to maneuver. I very often, when I assert sort of full control over things, I very often look at stuff that I see back, and I just don't feel it, or I just don't like it. It's a very interesting thing, and I think you sometimes you have to, or I feel I always have to be a little bit humble towards the subject.
Yeah.
Like a lot of cinematographers, or a thing of cinematography is that in order for your subject to make it to the world, it has to go through that filter of the cinematographer that will very precisely present that vision to you. Mm-hmm. Somehow, I have gotten a little bit more humble towards the subject, and also allowing things or actors or sets to speak for themselves, and then my job is very often it can even be as banal as that you just registrate greatness that other people have put in front of your camera.
Yeah.
Later you will get credit for it as a great cinematography, but it's more and more restraint in a way, and I think your filters, you're kind of if you imagine you as a cinematographer as a filtration device of reality, it becomes more and more holistic, and you become more and more sort of tolerant towards discrepancies and unevennesses. And that's one thing that I also love with an analog process afterwards. You end up with a film that is not all squeezed into that sort of framework that you do. It's sort of, it's wilder. It moves around more, and technically you can sometimes say, that sticks out a little bit, or that's a little bit less, or that's a little bit more, and these light levels, they jump a little bit. But when I watch a film, and especially after a while, when like a year later when I watch a film, I really start falling in love with those things, and I always think they're very beautiful.
Yeah. Well, it's like you were saying, like if you micromanage everything, I agree with you that I think it can become lifeless, because life is messy, and if the image is perfect, it can remove distraction,
Mm-hmm.
like you focus in on something, but at the same time the overall approach can be very clinical, and no one wants to be in a clinic.
Yeah, well, clinical. That means every time when you watch a film, you're watching a result that is created by a person that is maybe much more anal than yourself,
right?
And what's the purpose in that, and what's the fun in that?
You brought up like respecting the subject and stuff, and it occurred to me in this film that you were working with 4 actors who are actually directors.
Mhm.
You got Kenneth Branagh and Damon to a degree. You got RDJ to a degree. I wrote them down, but my notes are all this. I can't read whatever this is.
Something.
Yeah, Benny. Did they kind of teach you anything when you were working, or how was that dynamic? Obviously, I assume they kind of raised each other's game a little bit. Did that kind of wash its way onto you?
I mean, people come to one of Chris's sets and they come with a certain humility and I mean, the main thing that I noticed from these guys is mostly curiosity. They're just all very curious how we're doing things on set, and everybody runs their sets in different ways, and everybody has their own hangups. But like Matt, I mean, he can come to the camera and he can look at lenses and say, "Oh, why are you doing that, and why, and how are you thinking here?" And always with a lot of love and admiration, and good filmmakers, they're curious filmmakers, they're people that understand that whatever they do and the way they do is not the only way, so they're always very curious to go, and I always love looking at different cinematographers, doing things that I would, doing things that I usually do, and see how different approaches there are and how different ways things can be done. And I think I always feel that with actors that that are filmmakers as well as that actors that are directors themselves, they understand very much that mechanical wide shots and tight shots and but sometimes that can also a little bit work against them. If you're too clever of an actor and you know seamlessly how to tune your performance for tight shots and for wide shots, sometimes you want that actor or that actress that is totally unaware. And we're just on the side, sort of picking it up and cherry picking it. But curiosity is always a very sort of found emotion on one of Chris's sets.
Yeah. Ben Affleck. Brad Pitt's a big cinematography nerd, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, he's a filmmaker. He what I remember from it, he devours film. He watches films. He produces films. He wants to understand filmmaking, and for people like him, a film set is this playground where all these people are coming up with all these ideas and things and create something on the screen that is then turning out magic. And I think he very much understands the mechanics of it and is in love with the mechanics of it. Like I said, I always feel very much from the actors. I feel that curiosity and just that will to sort of, I mean, everybody wants to do a good job, but also, everybody is just curious what you're doing,
Yeah. The something that I didn't realize that you had shot, I should have started this sentence at the beginning. I'm a giant Spike Jonze fan.
Oh yeah.
And because in my head when I was younger, when I was starting to get into, the idea of becoming a cinematographer or filmmaker in general, Spike Jonze had this weird thing where he was somehow able to make an Oscar-winning film and Jackass, and like skateboard films and stuff. And that was just unheard of to me. I thought you had to be, Coppola. But I didn't know that you shot that home ad, that Apple home ad with FK.
Yeah.
That, I fucking loved that ad, man. That was such a good, I was so excited for that.
It's very nice because, talking about curiosity. I mean, if you work with Spike, he will never want to do the same thing twice, and he always comes up with new crazy ideas that have nothing to do with anything you prior. He loves throwing himself in the deep every time he comes up with a new creative idea or something like that. It's wild, yeah.
Well, and he also does a lot of kind of similar to Nolan, does a lot of stuff as much as he can in camera. I remember this one quote where he was saying that when he was going to go do Where the Wild Things Are, that Fincher got in his ear about the faces. He's like, you're going to fucking hate if they're puppets. And he's like, no, it'll be great. And then he gets there and he's like, nope, we're doing those digitally. This was a bad idea.
But he's super, how do you call it? Super, very intuitive as well, you know? Yes, he has to feel it. He really has to feel it. And in order for him to feel it, he will make every sacrifice, you know? He has to believe it. He has to feel it. And, you know, it has to be done with the right mentality. And, you know, he's very seldom smug about his ideas, and he has this kind of nice humbleness towards them, you know. But it's very difficult to keep up with that. But it's also very nice and very challenging, you know. You really you never get away with like trickery or you know, if you think that you know exactly what you're gonna do and how you're gonna do it, you know, you usually already can assume that you're doing it wrong, you know. You have to be a little bit on thin ice, or you know, it has to be a little there has to be a little bit of resistance, you know,
A little anxiety
for sure.
Do you going back to the idea that this just occurred to me, like the digital, you know, Spike is analog and stuff. What in Oppenheimer, I'm sure you may have spoken about this before, but what things were you not able to rely on that were purely analog or purely photochem? You know, in what did you have to rely on modern technology for to get the final project across the finish line?
I mean, listen, not to be mistaken, but we're using a lot of, you know, modern technology. We just combine it a lot with old sort of proven technology, right? I mean, the you know, my lighting package is in a way very modern. You know, the way we control lights and control colors now with help of, for instance, LED technology. I mean, we go all out, as well as, you know, the technology around the camera and the engineering around the camera and the lenses. This is not necessarily stuff that could have been done like 15 years ago even, or 10 years ago. And so, you know, Dan's work and the camera is excessive, you know, and it's, you know, he's an innovator. So he's always innovating. So we're not resorting in this old technology in order for us to just be old. I mean, you know, both myself and Chris, we're super tech freaks, as well as I shoot like, you know, 80% of stuff, you know, in my life, I shoot digital, you know,
right?
Like almost every commercial is done on digital camera. So I'm pretty much in tune with the technology and what's out there, et cetera, et cetera. But then also, you know, on the film with Chris, for instance, you know, we know what we like and we know how to do it. And if we can't achieve that, we start always finding ways, and, you know, finding ways to do things in camera. And again, we do that so that we can preserve the full quality. And if that doesn't work, I mean, sooner or later, you know, of course there's a computer, you know, helping us with creating things that we were unable to create. But until that moment arrives, we will have for sure exhausted any resource and any possibilities to you know, do it in a way that allows us to preserve as much as possible of the, you know, sort of the original vision or the original sort of richness.
Yeah. Well, and to your point about, not necessarily that this is your department, but something I noticed a lot that is technologically advanced that we would not have seen 15 years ago. 3D printing technology, being able to mock stuff up exactly the way you want it with 3D print. Like, I own a 3D printer and I print parts for my cameras and stuff just because it's easier.
Absolutely. And by the way, I mean, listen, on our camera department, there's a lot of 3D printed materials. Myself, I I do a lot of CNC machining. You know, I have a CNC mill in my garage.
Nice.
We are all the time building parts, and we are all the time building brackets or devices that enable us to do things that, you know, we've been exploring a lot of high-speed photography, of course, for this. You know, I bought myself an old Photosonic 65 millimeter camera. We were thinking about rebuilding, turned out to be too costly and too complex. But you know, we're always playing with things like that. You know.
Yeah. It's. Oh, go ahead.
No. Sorry.
Oh, another thing too that kind of in this sort of same vein is the idea of, I saw you did this in Dunkirk to a degree, Oppenheimer to a degree, where there isn't a slavish sort of approach to everything needs to be, this kind of goes back to the idea of emotionally correct versus technically correct. Everything needs to be period accurate down to the button, you know, where it's like you, I think it was mentioned that you try to bring everything up as modern as possible until it actually wouldn't make sense.
Yeah. I think, I mean, that was pretty much our philosophy in Dunkirk, but definitely also in Oppenheimer, and that is that, you know, you want it to feel alive, and you want it to feel real. You don't want to walk around in a film as if you're, you know, walking around in a museum, you know, museum of nostalgia, you know. That it was not what we're doing. We were not, you know, the film was not a vehicle to sort of show how funny the cars looked and how what a weird taste people had in terms of, you know, interior decoration or anything like that. All these kind of things, they you know, they wanted to be just, you know, they wanted to feel real, and you don't want to drag too much attention to it. And of course, there's different films. Some films they are designed in order for us to get a very specific period of time. But I think that, you know, like in Dunkirk, it was all about the anxiety of that beach and about the constant threats that is relentlessly pounding on you. And you know, on Oppenheimer, we were trying to tell the story of a you know, very ambiguous soul trying to achieve something in a world with a lot of resistance, and you know, working with very abstract ideas on something that, you know, potentially could have crazy and huge implications of mankind. And of course, you know, you might miss a point when you start watching that film, and suddenly you start noticing, you know, old cars or old buildings, and you know, those kind of cutenesses. I think for us, it has always been very important that you're not necessarily only engaged in watching something in an intellectual way, you know, but also you have to immerse yourself. You have to be able to be in it. You have to sort of be able to switch off your you know, certain parts of your brain in order to really live into that film, you know.
Well, and that actually brings up something that I can't remember the exact quote, but it stuck with me forever, because I think, again, this kind of, I just keep harping on this emotionally correct thing, but pure immersion is not, I don't think, what anyone wants, because if that were the case, anytime someone died, you would be horrified. Like if someone got shot, it would ruin your life. No one wants to watch a murder. So there is this weird middle ground where it is, you give yourself to the art form, whether it be music or film or whatever, and you let it speak to you in a non-intellectual way. And that is far more important than, as we're saying, like, oh, period correct, you know, hubcaps on this fucking thing, or, you know, whatever like that. And I think that's a hard thing to explain to non-artists. Like, don't, you know, especially in news and PR and all this, it's like, that's not necessary. Sometimes it's hard to explain, and that's fine. You just got to feel it.
Yeah. And of course, you know, the proof is in the pudding always, you know, and the way people experience your film, it's totally exclusively to them. you know, you can tell people, oh, you have to watch it this way, or you have to watch it on a big screen or a small screen. In the end, people watch it the way they want, and they should, you know. And the only thing you can do is to, you know, make as much as possible impact, or find the ways that you can sort of make that experience be as, you know, intense as possible. And of course, there's limits to that as well. But for me, it's interesting, Chris. For me, with working on IMAX is very much framing. For instance, framing is one of these very interesting things because, you know, where I come from, you know, Polish film school, you know, framing and, you know, the golden ratio, and, you know, for years I've been framing up things very neatly, you know, the way that I thought was correct for cinematography, with the adequate head space and the adequate amount of negative space, and, you know, every shot always looked very well composed, you know.
Formalism.
But what is well composed? And in recent years, I started center punching a lot more, you know. I started sort of stepping away from that sort of, you know, cinematography kind of cinematographer framework kind of way of thinking, and I just started to notice in myself that, you know, I responded to frames in a very different way when I started center framing, you know, in an emotional way. And then when you start working with IMAX, for instance, you know, the way that IMAX work and the way that your eye scanning work in the cinema, you're forced to center frame, because when you start offsetting things in a frame, you know, certain sequences don't work at all, you know. Right. So then you start, you know, instead of seeing your frame as a two-dimensional sort of composition, you have to start thinking about depth perception, for instance, you know, even in wider shots, you know. For one shot, you cut into this shot and you sit in the cinema, and what do you see, what do you feel, and how do you experience the depth of it, and how immersive is it, and so on. And that's very interesting, because I now very often I watch films done by colleagues or very talented colleagues, and I look at their frames and there's nothing wrong with it. It's beautiful and it's perfect, and probably a lot of people will say, "Oh, this is great cinematography," and I just get irritated. You know, I'm just like, why the fuck did you put this specific scene in the perfect golden ratio, and why did just pen right, put it in the center, and you know, and allow us to just watch it without showing, hey, this is done by a cinematographer, and I have to have a point of view here, you know.
Yeah.
It's you know, again, you know, through time, you know, I get slightly more courageous in order to be a little simpler as well.
Yeah.
But, you know, you still, it's a lesson that you have to learn, you know. I would probably never have had this thought if I wouldn't have come from a very conservative sort of, you know, cinema school background, like Polish film school, for instance.
Yeah. The one thing that I started doing in the similar vein was I learned on 60mm film, but I deleted the guide frames on my digital cameras, because it's so easy to just set yourself in that grid, you know, that 3x3 grid or whatever, and then make sure he's in the corner, and instead it's just blank, and all I have left is the is battery and recording time, just so I don't fuck that up. But, like, you know, and just let the little box speak for itself, you know.
I love if you work, Chris, with a camera operator. It's the best way to screw around with a camera operator is that, you know, they frame something up, and then, you know, you have something in the side of your frame, right? And then you see they walk through the set and everything, that if something would be here, you know, they would put it here. So there's
right
space here and here, you know. So, and then it really complements that frame. But I always end up walking on the set and shoving everything to the side. Slightly irritating. You can drive operators totally nuts with that. But I just I just also, there's something how do you call it, finite with a well composed frame. It's like when you put everything in the right space from your frame edges, and you have exactly the right adequate headspace, then your frame left, right, that's the world. That's everywhere. That's where we live in as an audience. Whereas I think if something sticks half out of the frame, that already breaks that thing, and then suddenly you have a frame, which is you put a framework in there, but the world grows out beyond the frame, and I think that's a very beautiful thought in a way, and of course, as humans or as cinematographers, I would say we always have the impulse to put things in a box and neatly present it, but there is something to be said about making that box not too precious and letting things lead out of it, so that as an audience you still can envision or imagine the world, the world that you can't capture as the filter, as a cinematographer.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's anything kind of over here suggests more world versus just the proscenium.
Yeah, and it also suggests that there is such a thing, and that the real world and the real emotions is not something that just is valid when it's boxed in by you as a visionary. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, it's I'm being told I have to let you go, but
I have to, unfortunately. But it was a good conversation, I think.
Yeah, I was gonna say that I have this theory that human nature is everyone wants to, like, you go to a house party, everyone always wants to be in the kitchen, like everyone likes squeezing themselves into boxes, and you're like, no, get out of the rest of the house. But yeah, man, it was super awesome talking to you. Next time you get a chance or whatever, I'd love to have you back if you'd be willing. Because
absolutely,
I'd love to talk more about the sort of philosophy of these things with you.
Yeah, it's all fake, and there's still a lot to learn.
Yeah. Well, I'll let you get to the rest of your day, man. Thank you again so much, and take care.
Take care. Bye.